All right, moving on to epithelial tissue. So yesterday you got an introduction to it. Today is all about epithelial tissue in more detail. Here's a couple of terms you'll see in this section. Epithelia are the layers of cells that cover internal or external surfaces. So epithelia is the same thing as saying epithelial tissue. Those two words are interchangeable. That's supposed to be a double-sided arrow. It doesn't look like one. Okay, and glands are structures that produce secretions. So anything in your body that secretes something, maybe it secretes a hormone or a chemical or sweat. Those are glands, and glands are epithelial tissue as well. So epithelial tissue covers a surface or it's a gland. Here are some characteristics of epithelia. Let's not type all of these. Okay, let's say, here, I'll mark the ones. Let's do this one. Attachment. They have a basement membrane, also called a basal lamina. We're probably going to use basement membrane, but sometimes you might see the term basal lamina. It's the same thing. So they all have an attachment on the bottom part of the tissue, and I'll show you a picture of that. They're also avascular. Does anybody have any idea what avascular might mean?
Oh no. Oh man. It's like abiotic and that.
A means not.
So not vascular.
And what does vascular mean?
Lack of blood vessels.
Yep, lack of blood vessels. So there's no blood supply to epithelial tissues. So when we look at it, you're not going to see blood vessels in them. And the other characteristic that you should be aware of is regeneration. Epithelial tissues regenerate. They go through this process where new cells are made. And what do we call that process? Yeah, these things are actively going through mitosis. They're, what's the word? Mitotic, is that a word? Did I make that up? Mitotic. Go through mitosis? I don't know. I'll elaborate on that. One reason they have to regenerate is because they're on the surfaces, so they're going to get like worn away, and then they get replaced by new cells. So they're actively replacing themselves. Just like the surface of your skin, you're constantly shedding skin cells, but they're being replaced by new ones. And so that's also true anywhere you have epithelial tissue. An example of an epithelial tissue, we're going to have lots of examples. You probably don't need to worry about putting this in your notes. Some of them are going to have a surface. Some of them have cilia or microvilli on the top. This might be worth noting somehow in your notes, though. This apical surface, that's the top surface. That's the free surface. So that's the surface that's in contact with something from the outside. It might be in contact with food in your digestive system. Might be in contact with air that you breathe, might be in contact with anything on the surface of your skin. So the apical surface is sometimes called the free surface, and it's on towards the outside. And then the other one that you need to know is the basement membrane. That's going to be basically like the bottom or attachment. Usually it's going to be attached to some sort of connective tissue. So those are two surfaces that you should be aware of. The apical surface and the basement membrane. I think we could probably write all of these functions. So functions of epithelial tissue. They provide physical protection, like act as a barrier. So because they regenerate, if you have an abrasion, like a cut or something, it will repair itself. So physical protection, like in your digestive system, if you didn't have that ability to regenerate as your food went through, it just basically wipe away all of your, it came back on, wipe away all of your cells and they wouldn't replace themselves. So the physical production part has to do with regeneration. They control permeability. You guys remember what that means from biology, permeability?
Able to pass through.
Yeah, allows some things to pass through and other things not to. That's especially, well, it's important in your skin and your digestive system. Like you can allow some things through your skin, but it keeps most things out. And your digestive system, you have to let the nutrients come through and the water, and it leaves other things out. There are like some nerve endings in epithelial tissue, so it provides sensation. And this last one's only for glands, produces specialized secretions. I was just talking about that. So epithelium is singular, epithelia is plural. In case you don't have to write that, but if you want to make a note, you can. But we do talk about epithelium based on shape. So you will be learning what squamous and cuboidal and columnar and simple and stratified are. So I guess the first bunch, these are based on shape. And the bottom is based on layers. So we actually put those words together, like simple squamous, stratified cuboidal, simple cuboidal, stratified squamous. So squamous means thin and flat. Squamous, or you'll hear it pronounced squamous also. Thin and flat. And we'll see some pictures of all of these. Cuboidal looks like it sounds. Cubed shaped, square shaped. We know that cells are three-dimensional, so cube is a good term. Columnar, what shape is that going to be? Like a column, tall and slender. And we can also use terms to describe how many layers the tissue is. Simples when we have one layer, and if it's more than one layer of cells, then it's stratified. Simple is one layer of cells, stratified is several layers of cells. Hey, do you want some pictures in your notes? These are types of simple epithelia. So you have simple squamous, which is one layer of flat, thin cells. Simple squamous is one layer of flat, thin cells. Simple cuboidal is how many layers? And what shape of cells? Cubed. One layer of cube-shaped cells. And then simple columnar, how many layers? One. And what shape? Columns. Also notice how the nuclei line up, because we're going to see something else that looks like simple columnar later that's not. So if we look, the nuclei are lined up, and you also see a lot of times simple columnar will have that layer of cilia, or sometimes called microvilli. Those are two separate things, but it could be lined with that too. So those are some key things to look at with simple columnar. Here's stratified tissue. The stratified squamous, that's actually from your skin here. It's going to look a little more cuboidal on the bottom, but we're looking at the fact that the top is flat and thin, so that we can see that it's squamous. And it's more than one layer, so it's stratified. Cuboidal, if it's two or more layers, it's considered stratified. A lot of times it won't be more than 2 or 3 layers for stratified cuboidal. And columnar, notice how the bottom looks cuboidal. We're still looking at the top layer of cells. Those are columnar shaped. And also look how the nuclei are lined up with columnar. This seems pretty easy or hard? We'll probably just write this first part. So we don't talk about mesothelium or endothelium in this class. But simple epithelia, start with simple squamous. That's going to be function in absorption and diffusion. So absorbing things through the layer or diffusing things through the layer. Because it's thin, it can easily allow things to pass through. Absorption and diffusion. This slide has a lot of information on it. We don't need to write all of it, but it tells us other places where you find simple squamous. So if I find some good ones, I'll highlight them there for you. Pick out a different highlighter color. So some of this isn't going to make sense to you. So we already put lining the heart and blood vessels. Go ahead and put portion of, just put kidney. We don't need to worry about the fact that they're the tubules. And alveoli of lungs would probably be important too. So lining of heart, blood vessels, kidney, alveoli, and lungs. I think the function that we already wrote for absorption and secretion will be fine. We don't need to add these other functions unless you want to. But here's a picture of simple squamous in the peritoneal cavity, which is outside your digestive system. And here, over on the side, is what you're going to see under the microscope when we look at that. So it's not that side view that we saw on the animated ones. You're going to see it from the top. Well, depending on what type of slide you have. This is not a cross section, but so this is what you'll see a lot, like just flattened cells, and see those good nuclei there. So stratified squamous epithelium, its function is to protect against attacks. That sounds weird. Protection, like against foreign invaders, against bacteria and germs, against abrasion. And it adds strength and water resistance. And some stratified squamous epithelium has keratin in it. We'll talk more about that with the integumentary system, but keratin is just a protein, like waterproofs your skin. It gives it strength. Some of this function is kind of like what you just wrote, so you can add that how you want to. Under the microscope, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between connective tissue and epithelial tissue. The epithelial tissue, you'll see really distinct cells and nuclei. The connective tissue looks kind of wavy and messy, but there should be this basement membrane in between the two that you should find. Cuboidal. Oops, let's scroll up. So there's simple and stratified cuboidal. Because simple cuboidal is one layer, its functions are secretion and absorption. Stratified cuboidal, you can find that in sweat glands and mammary ducts. Locations of simple cuboidal is glands and ducts. I'd probably just leave it at that. Glands and a duct. Well, you guys know what like air ducts in your house are, right? Like channels to go places. It's similar. You have ducts, like sweat ducts, mammary ducts, for secretions to go through. Functions of simple cuboidal. It's some protection, so it's limited protection, but mostly secretions and absorption for your functions of simple cuboidal, which you probably have already. So here's, in this picture here, you see a kidney. If you zoom in on the kidney, we have these little tubules in them, in the nephrons. That's how kidneys, like all your blood goes through there to filters the bad stuff out of the blood and keep the good stuff in. So the blood has to go, blood and nutrients and salts and water and stuff have to go through the layer of simple cuboidal cells here. And so you can see a drawing of it, and then here's what it looks like under the microscope. So that's in a kidney. So you'll see stratified cuboidal lining some ducts. So the stratified cuboidal itself is rare. There's not much in your body. But the functions, if you don't have them, are protection, secretion, and absorption. If we look at the picture, it looks like there's a lot of sweat glands. It's actually, a sweat gland is like a tube that's balled up, and so it's a really, really thin tube. Here, I'll draw it over here. And it, oops, wrong pen. And it gets kind of coiled, I think is the word I'm looking for. If you take that coil and cut it down the middle and look at the side of it, then it'll look like a bunch of circles like we have in the picture here. So it's basically taking the coiled tube, cutting it in half, and looking at, so the lining of that tube is stratified cuboidal. So you can see the basement membrane here is the outside. And what they call here, we talked about the apical surface in a gland, they call it or a duct, they call it the lumen. This empty space inside. It kind of looks like a donut, right? So it'd be like the donut hole would be the lumen, but that's where the sweat would go through.